Welcome to AOL. Welcome to AOL Underground.
Please state your handle and the years you were active on AOL.
My handle was ShiZZa OaK, and eventually Oakleys, spelled super cool, OAKLEEZ, as we did. And then eventually I shortened it to Oak when I realized it wasn't all that cool.
Right on. So when did you first use a computer?
First use a computer I was trying to rack my brain. I know you ask everybody this question. I want to think it was like 1987 or 88. That would put me in like first or second grade. My school had, the computer lab with the green Apple IIs in it, like a lot of us had back in the 80s and early 90s. I remember playing like Number Munchers, Oregon Trail. There was that little program called Logo that had the little turtle, the little triangle guy, and you could kind of give him commands on what to do. And I'd like to think that that's probably the first time I ever, quote unquote, programmed anything, was telling him what to do. And then as far as my first computer that I actually owned outside of school, I want to think it was around 1992. My stepdad got the family the big cow box, the Gateway 2000 PC, with the giant CRT monitor. I think it was a 486, a couple hundred megs of hard drive space, 8 megs of RAM. But the shining feature at the time, it had a 1X CD-ROM drive, so that was the coolest thing ever. I could play music on my computer, and I used that essentially to learn the basics. And I remember we got it, we set it up, we booted it up, and it went to DOS. It didn't even go to Windows. And we didn't know what the heck to do. So we literally, read the manual and we type win, and then it opened up the world of Windows 3.1 to us. And then I eventually, for the first couple of years we had it, I used it for like Wolfenstein, Doom, and I used to actually order shareware discs through the mail, because that's what you did back then. It was the only way I knew at the time to find stuff was, I found a catalog and they would send me shareware and I'd pay them for floppies.
Interesting. So when did you find the internet?
Well, that Gateway PC had a 14.4 modem in it. I guess that was best at the time, obviously far from the best even a few years later. But it kind of went unused for a while, because there was very little concept of online back then. It was pretty limited. I remember exactly how I found out about bulletin boards, BBSs. We had a software, etc. store in our mall back when malls were full of stores. And they had this big, thick book. It was about 3 or 4 inches thick. And you might know what I'm talking about, or somebody else might have mentioned it. It was called the Internet Yellow Pages. It was gigantic, but it was like, wow. It sorted everything. It's what it was. It was like an old Yellow Pages. It sorted everything by state, and it was bigger states or cities. It sorted things by type, and it was just phone numbers and a little bit of basic information like the name and what they might specify, in for their services, bulletin boards around the country. And I couldn't believe it. I flipped to the state I was in at the time. I flipped to my town, which was only about 50,000 people, and sure enough, there was 3 or 4 listings for bulletin boards I could call. And I was like, well, I guess I got to fork over $15 to get this, 3 lines out of 1 page. In hindsight, I should have just brought a pen back and written them down, but I still wanted to browse through the book, and we did call some long distance ones and stuff back in the day. But that was the first time I ever got online, was bulletin boards. And AOL, we are, a lot of your guests and we were always dating ourselves on this, and AOL wasn't everywhere right away. It wasn't always a thing, and people were online before AOL, believe it or not, even us kids. But yeah, so I was on bulletin boards for a bit until finally my town got local AOL numbers, back when you had to call long distance for things too. So, I sure as heck wasn't going to be allowed to, spend 10 cents a minute to dial into AOL until it came local. So, I was on those before AOL. And there wasn't much to bulletin boards. They had a couple text-based games we kind of tinkered around with. Most of them had a little like file download shareware section, but it was usually very sparse, because these were just, housed by people most of the time, not even companies. Some guy had 3 extra lines to his house and ran a bulletin board. And if you were taking up a line, that meant nobody else could log in. So he wasn't going to let you sit there and download all day. But I'd like to think that there had to be some kind of pirated something. Was the first time I ever got any pirated anything was off one of those bulletin boards. Probably something relating to Doom or Wolfenstein or something like that.
Nice. So then AOL came to your town, and then what happened?
I was trying to think too, it's hard to, the dates are all a blur now. It's so long ago, but I think around 93, And I think it was around AOL 2.0, 2.0, 2.5, that era when they still came on floppies before they came on CDs. I remember joining AOL with a floppy disk. But like I said, I think I got it either through the mail or in a magazine. They tucked them into every magazine back then. And it was funny because before I could actually join AOL, I would just collect all those discs and, overwrite them and use them to, put things I download on them. But eventually, the numbers came to my town. I could actually use one, popped it in and loaded up and dialed up. And again, like we all were just, so new to this stuff. I didn't even know if my parents ever logged in. They just, they let me use their credit card. I signed up an account and then it was just started exploring pretty much.
You signed up with the free account, and did you have an extra line at this point, or were you taking up your family's line?
I was taking up my family's line. There was a lot of "Mom, I'm on the internet," or "Get off the internet," and I had to explain to my parents the first few times what those weird noises were when they picked up the phone. I do remember my mom thought the phone was broken when she picked it up once, and it was making the modem noises. She didn't really know what was going on. But then eventually I did get a what they I don't know what they call them in your town, but in my town they were known as a teen line. It was something in the mid 90s where if you already had a landline in your house, you could add a second line for your teen line, and it had extra features. It always, my line had, I honestly think it was like $10 a month. My parents didn't charge me for it. They were just happy to get me off their line. But it had call waiting, eventually caller ID. That stuff was built into these lines, and man, did we exploit those. But the early days of AOL, I did have to share the house phone with it, so I wasn't on it a whole ton. Yeah, right around I discovered the Warez scene is when I got that extra line, so I could kind of dedicate a little more time to it.
Got online, and then on AOL, you were screwing around, and then how did you find the scene?
In kind of the most organic way ever. I mentioned the bulletin boards, and you did there were ways to kind of chat or send rudimentary email on those bulletin boards. So eventually I found out there were other kids in my school that were on those bulletin boards, and we kind of knew we didn't like the word nerds back then, but we were the nerds. We were the ones on bulletin boards for, in 1994 or whatever. One of the kids in my classes was on a bulletin board. He's like, "Hey, you should go to AOL. You can download a lot more stuff on there." I was like, "What are you talking about? Let me know what you're talking about. Expand on this." So I kind of courted him at school. I'm like, what did you mean get on AOL? What else is there to do? How can you download stuff on AOL? And he told me about the OG chat room called Warez. I remember he wrote it down. I'm like, how do you spell that? Warez. And of course, we did pronounce it Warez. I don't know. I know there's a whole pop versus soda thing, a Warez versus Warez, and all that. But we were Warez through and through. He told me, and I remember it was just straight up Warez. No weird, it wasn't Zero, it wasn't free Warez, it wasn't server. Some of those ones that popped up later. Like I remember. And if you could ever find someone, this is one question I was going to ask you. Do you know the timeline of when the original Warez chat rooms were banned or blocked? Has anybody ever given you that date at all? Do you know that?
Oh, I'm not sure about the date, but I think it was during AOL 3 at least. Like 2.5 is still around. If I recall correctly, I could be wrong, but it was a sad day when that happened. I remember.
Yeah, I do too. And I think so that puts it, I guess, around 94, something like that. But I do remember being in the original Warez room, and I do remember it going down. So I was probably, I started put my foot in the door with the scene around late 93 or 94, whenever that was. I remember I got in there, got one of the infamous mass mails. You never forget your first mass mail, is what I tell people in the scene. All of a sudden, it's like, you got mail. You guys know the sound. And then you go, eat dinner and come back and, oh, I have 300 new emails and they're all programs I want to try out or new games or who knows what, proggies and stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It was, I got into Warez and started just, keep my eyes and ears open, started learning things. And like we all did, we learned from each other and learned what mass mails were and how to coax people into giving you a mass mail and all that. But yeah, and it's from those mass mails. I know you guys ask people, what kind of programs we used. I remember one of the very first mass mails I got was an early version of AOL. And I remember I didn't know what it was at first. It sat in my inbox forever. And then, like a lot of people have mentioned on your podcast here, that you see something scroll by and you're like, what is that? What's going on there? Like you notice something in a chat room you hadn't seen before. And of course, it was one of like the AOL scroller things, or whatever. That had a tag at the bottom. The Chronic liked to put his name on stuff, and I don't blame him. I would have too. So then I'm like, okay, I better grab and install this thing. So I used AOL early on, but it was kind of crippled shortly thereafter. I remember it had like the credit card prefixes for a bit, but that died out pretty fast. I think that was easy thing for AOL to kind of stomp out. It was really rudimentary. You just put in the first few numbers and then garbage, and it worked. I mean, that was probably pretty easy for them to circumvent that. And then when that and a few other things fell off of AOL, I switched over to Lucifer X by Nails. So shout out to Nails. I know you've had him on here before. Lucifer X was what I used for the majority of my time on there. I didn't really dance around. I don't know if I was afraid of viruses or I just found something that I was comfortable with, but I didn't really always look for the next best thing like a lot of folks. I just, Lucifer X was my jam, and I liked how it looked. I liked how it worked, and it worked for the kind of limited things I did. I moved kind of a little bit to account phishing for a while using Lucifer X. Didn't really go beyond that. I never did any carding, anything like that. I did. I guess I was a good kid, quote unquote. I drew a mental line somewhere. I didn't want to mess with individual people, short of phishing them and then putting a sub account on and maybe tying up their account here and there.
Good in your head. You were phishing people, for God's sakes.
I know. But, my only intention to phish them was to have an account. And I didn't do anything with their stuff. I never messed with people's emails. I never changed passwords. The only thing I literally would do was if I phished an account and it was what did they call it? Master accounts, I guess, the main account. I would just put a sub account on. I'd have that in my back pocket. And if my main account went down, I had those as a backup to get back on. That's really all I did with it. Or, send a mass mail to this box and then have that as a backup if you need a program later on. That's really all I use them for, is extra emails. But we used to also dial into, and it kind of made, we obviously all knew it was wrong doing that. And it made me a little nervous. Again, I guess I was a good kid in my head. I knew it at least should have made me nervous. So beyond the local numbers, what I also did at that time is I would dial into a service called SprintNet. Have you ever used that or had anybody talk about SprintNet?
I've heard a little bit about SprintNet, but I'd love to hear you explain it.
SprintNet, I got to think, and I would love to, I never actually Googled it. I'm sure there's some info out there about it on Wiki or whatever, but it was, obviously the phone company Sprint, and they were a big landline company at the time before the cell phone era. And they did a huge partnership with AOL just to get more people online. And they had huge phone banks in big cities is how they started with SprintNet. It had spread out. And eventually, I don't know if I discovered it in a Warez room or what, but somehow we discovered a huge phone bank of 1-800 numbers that were SprintNet numbers. And they had nicer modems than my local. So calling wherever this 800 number was, I was getting a better connection, better download speeds, stuff like that, and not having to pay long distance. So any of these phished accounts, I thought, in my little 14-year-old brain, I thought it was so much more secure to, call an 800 number instead of the bank down the street, but or the modems down the street. But it also helped us avoid local busy signals. They couldn't keep up with AOL numbers back in the day. People always talk about, they limited, it wasn't unlimited. You had so many hours, things like that. But it really was sometimes a struggle to even get a connection to get on, at least in my town. It kind of outgrew itself very fast. So, good old shout out to SprintNet, wherever it is these days, for those nice 800 numbers that didn't cost anything.
That's great. That's really cool. So then you, I see that ShiZZa is in your handle. So how did you end up with ShiZZa?
Yeah, I see it's in yours too. What's up, brother?
Yeah, I was also in ShiZZa.
Yeah. I wonder if I've been wondering over the past few weeks if we've ever crossed paths, and I'm sure we have. Having that ShiZZa in front, it was a bigger group and a bigger community, but it was tight knit at the same time. I feel like I'm sure I interacted with at least 3/4 of the members at some point. But yeah, so this puts us at 94, 95 or so. I started joining, private Warez rooms or making friends that said, hey, me and my buddies hang out. It wasn't necessarily groups, but it was like, hey, let's get away from these public rooms with everybody scrolling and punting and the Wild West, Warez and Zero and things like that. Hey, join this private room. It's a little more chill. It's people that know their stuff. Come join us, kind of thing. And so I made a few friends like that, and I got into these private Warez rooms. Eventually, I kind of remember it, that you started seeing patterns of prefix names, like a ShiZZa. There was a ton of them, but some of the bigger groups had a lot of members, and you'd join, a a chat room, which what were they limited to? I think 21 people in a chat room. Is that what it was?
It's like 23 or 21, I forget.
Yeah, something like that. But they were small, but you'd join one and all of a sudden you'd see 5 people that was like ShiZZa Bob's, ShiZZa OaK, ShiZZa whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, there's a pattern here. What's going on with this? And at first, I remember first thinking, are these bots or some kind of like servers or something? But no, they were people in a group, just, putting on their, quote unquote gamer tag or whatever you want to call it, just their nickname. So I started hanging out in these rooms. They had a lot of ShiZZa guys in there, but the way I actually got into the group was I knew a local guy in my town who, and I really honestly don't even remember his name. I don't know how he got his hookup. I don't know if he worked for Microsoft or what. If it wasn't, he was very close to them. He could get physical beta CDs of Windows 95. That was a big deal back then in 94-ish, 95. So he would he would get like a new CD in the mail every week, he told me. I remember once. It'd be like new build. There was no way to download anything like that back then. They didn't have, even Microsoft didn't have servers, or it was quicker to mail them a copy than to let them download it from anywhere using anything. So he would get these new CDs and they would pile up. Sometimes they'd send him a couple in a week. So when he did that, I'd be like, hey, if you ever get any extras, let me know. Because I wanted to play with it too. Everybody wanted a beta OS on their machine back then, especially 95. That was a game changer. Nobody wants DOS and 3.1 anymore. So I got a couple of these CDs and I, would talk to the ShiZZa guys like, hey, I got some Windows 95 betas. They don't need keys. I remember that as a specific thing. You didn't even need a key to use the betas. They just sent them to devs. It is what it is. It had some like dev tools on it, not much else. And it had a little thing you could click to report. It would just really just pop up an email to report an error or a bug, and you'd have to describe it yourself. It didn't have any identifiers or anything for the bug. You had to come up with how to describe it. And as far as I know, those disks weren't tied to him at all in any way. There wasn't even a key, for crying out loud. So I had no problem sharing those, and I knew that would get me tons of clout. So I ripped a couple of those. On my teen line, I could upload all night, overnight, and I would put them on one of ShiZZa's like FTP sites. And man, that instantly got me a lot of access and a lot of clout. And basically back then, if you put in some time chatting and you weren't an idiot, and you put in down a couple memorable uploads, that was enough to get you full access to 0-day sites and FTPs and whatever your group had available.
It's funny, I didn't even know like ShiZZa had all this stuff. I was like, I was just like still stuck in the chat rooms. It's so funny. So you rightly so got access to 0-days and sites and stuff after that. So what were you doing in the group? Were you just like mass mails and stuff? Were you procuring software? Like what was like your role?
And honestly, the only thing that I remember doing to like quote unquote help the group was supplying some Windows 95 builds. Like I said, is if you had that stuff, they would open up the game. They already trusted me because I'd been chatting with them for a while. They knew me, quote unquote, like any of us knew each other, but they knew I wasn't, rambunctious. They knew I wasn't, out of control like some people were back then, just even in private rooms. I feel like they knew they could trust me. And then I had some access to stuff. They opened up the doors and said, hey, if you can supply some things, you get your own login to these sites. And, that's all I needed to do. They didn't come, they weren't organized enough to say, hey, you haven't given us anything in 3 weeks. What's the deal? I'm going to turn off your login. There was no ratios. There was no anything like that back then. So once you had your foot in the door and they knew you and you talked to them and you weren't a jackass, that's all you needed to do. It eventually, and I say 0 days in the sense of what I understood one back then as, and AOL groups were never the cream of the crop as much as we want to pretend we were. We were second fiddle to the real internet people, the Razor 1911s. Those guys out there, they're the Mount Rushmore of how this stuff happened, and that's where we got all our stuff. Like, yeah, I did supply some stuff directly to ShiZZa, and I think they loved me because of that. But I like to think 99% of the stuff they got, they went out to like IRC or some other place or some actual FTP top site, and they pulled it into AOL that way. They were never first. It might be the same day, it might be the next day, it might be a week later, but that's the kind of sites we had. But I mean, as just a kid that supplied a few things and I'm 14 years old, I felt like I had access to everything. as little as there was to have access to back then. I would log into these 0-day, quote unquote 0-day sites. They'd have folders named after the date. I'd log in before school, I'd log in after school, and there'd be dozens, if not hundreds of things dumped in there every day. Good and bad. You never knew what stuff was. but it was fairly organized, and um, the scene did evolve. I think. I mean, honestly, I think the scene only devolved on AOL. Not to throw anybody under the bus specifically, but it peaked early and then it was coasting downhill after that. I was in ShiZZa, I think, for about 1 to 2 years before I moved on to IRC and other things. It kind of bored me after a while. I mean, because I already had all the access, and I was chatting with the same people, and people would come and go. But I had found a quote unquote elite group to be part of. I didn't really pursue any other stuff. I didn't need another group. I wasn't always looking for the next thing. I was comfy in the access and the access I had and the people I knew. But then and it definitely, the scene did definitely help me learn about things. I discovered stuff like shell accounts, obviously FTPs. Seemed like the more popular the Warez stuff got, it just devolved. If anything, viruses showed up more, bad uploads. It kind of just tainted the whole thing. So I kind of gravitated to the FTP side and an IRC side of things because I found that to be better organized and more well curated, honestly.
Do you remember when MP3, like, did you have Frauenheimer's like WinPlay?
Oh yeah. I had it day one, actually.
Really?
Oh my God, yeah. That was, I guess that I honestly, I did probably grab that off of one of those ShiZZa 0 days. And whether it was the actual day, it was very close if it was not. It came bundled with, I remember I legitimately, and I've taught, you guys might not know the name, and I would love it if you could get him on. He is still kind of around, a guy named Netfrack. He was not an AOLer, but he was literally the first guy to pirate an MP3. It was Metallica's Until It Sleeps. And this stuff's all out there. I'm not breaking any news here as far as that stuff goes, but I remember specifically downloading that one. I had a buddy in high school who was like obsessed with Metallica at the time. Everybody had that one friend. And I'd never really dabbled. And I was doing my morning routine, getting my cereal before high school, going through my FTP sites to see if there's anything to download while I'm at school. That was my routine. And I'm flipping through, and I see something that says Metallica Until It Sleeps. I'm like, why would there be a Metallica thing on this FTP site? This is just games and apps. What is this? What's going on here? Click on it, read the info before I download, and it's like new, groundbreaking. It was, the info files were pretty, but it's like, here's a MP3. Here's what MP3 is. It was an info file, like basically explaining what the hell an MP3 was. So I'm just I remember just reading it, eating my Captain Crunch or whatever. Like, this is interesting. So I add it to my daily queue, go to school, think nothing of it. And I think a couple days later, I open it up and I'm like, this sounds great. This is, and I triple checked. I'm like, is this only 2 megabytes? What the heck is going on here? And I remember, I had like I said, I had that 1X CD-ROM drive. I tinkered. I tried to rip CDs myself, but man, you ripped one song off a CD. It was 50 megabytes. I think my whole hard drive was 300 at the time. So I'm not, I can't keep more than 2 songs on my drive. So there's no point until, of course, we all know MP3s changed the game. Before I really wanted to shift to IRC and MP3s and all that, I wanted to ask one more question about AOL because there's, I love your podcast. I've burned through every episode in the last couple months. And I kind of take mental notes, and I don't think anyone ever has mentioned this about AOL. And it's something one of my fondest memories. Do you remember a thing called MTV Yack Live?
No, I don't. I've someone contacted me about like some sort of like teen thing. But I was never really, I never really went to the keywords. Is that a keyword thing or what was it?
Well, technically it was a keyword. So what MTV Yack Live was actually an MTV show on MTV, the cable channel. And they partnered with AOL. And what they would do is they had their own chat rooms on AOL, private ones. And people could join those. And they, no joke, would air the comments on live MTV.
What a horrible idea.
What a great idea if you know what you're doing on AOL.
That is so funny.
What a great idea if you're like this guy and has OH accounts. And do you remember one of the things you could do with OH accounts or overhead accounts? You could bust into full chat rooms. It wasn't just guide accounts. So guess what we did? We got live on MTV multiple times. And half the time we were talking in code because those mods if there even were any, had no clue what they were doing. No, obviously they had filters or even human filters or a small delay for, like the F word or any racist stuff or any just, obvious garbage you can't put on TV. Man, we were shouting out ShiZZa. We were talking about the Warez scene, and it was broadcast in front of our face on the TV, behind us on MTV. Like, oh my God, I couldn't believe we pulled that off. But yeah, so I through ShiZZa and some of these like PBXs and stuff, we used to chat with each other. And I remember this is a great, and this is related to the MTV Yack stuff, and so I want to bring it up. Is the only time I ever got an overhead account or AOH account. They had these PBXs, which are dial in, basically conference calls. I really don't understand how they worked. They were giant. You could get 50 people on one call. It was kind of chaos, but people would either hack these or I don't know how they would get them. I assume they hacked them and they would just send these invite, 800 number, you put in a code and you're joined into the room. So there was some of these people in ShiZZa or whatever. They would invite you and they would invite you to these when they got a code to create OH accounts. Now, I think some of your guests have touched on this in the past about like maybe where those came from, or hell, I don't know. Maybe I got it from them. Honestly, there couldn't have been too many people doing this stuff. But regardless, they got like the code to sign up an account on AOL. But it was one that when you created the account, you had a shiny brand new OH account. And back then, they were supposed to be one-time use accounts. And I think I'm trying to remember. I honestly don't remember. One of your guests talked about how some of the employees eventually had like a little timer on their desk and a code would change or something every few minutes. That kind of like like how you do 2FA now. I feel like these codes were supposed to be one-time use, but the thing is, they didn't actually show up in the system as used for a couple minutes. So we would coordinate on these giant phone calls and then quickly get off there, log into AOL, sign up with this code, and everyone, 50 people, would now have an OH account off of one code. As long as we coordinated it and you did it in enough time. And
that's incredible.
Those OH accounts lasted forever. I don't know why. I don't know where they originated from. I got them here and there in other places, but they would always die in a day or two. The guides would find them, or I assume the employees could tell what kind of account was joining a room, or maybe they noticed you bust into a full room or whatever. But man, I had just the name OaK, 3-letter name, as an OH account for over a year. And that was so much fun. That OaK was on MTV Yack Live a few times talking about ShiZZa and other stuff. But there actually is, if anybody's interested in the MTV Yack Live, I did a deep dive. There's a couple links that show a website about it on like the Internet Archives, but somebody randomly put some clips of it that must have been taped on a VHS of the actual show MTV Yack Live on YouTube. There's a couple Green Day songs specifically that they put up on YouTube. So if you search for Green Day MTV Yack YACK Live, you can see what it is. It's literally the video of Green Day on the left corner, and then the whole right side is just scrolling text of absolute nonsense.
That is great. That sounds like really fun.
It was a good time. But that's something I thought I could be. I'm not one of those guys like DeChronic. I'm not a guy that I'm guessing nobody knows my name. And previous to this episode, I'm not a Nails. I'm not a DeChronic. I didn't have my name out there. I was just a guy that dabbled in a bunch of stuff. But that was the beauty of this whole mess we were a part of. The 90s and AOL is we all dabbled in 1,000 different things, and I've forgotten 900 of them. And if I can remember a couple things and remind some people on your show here of like, oh my God, yeah, I did that too. Then that's my favorite part of your show, is listening and listening closely and being like, oh yeah, I did that too. I can't believe I forgot about that. And that's the whole nostalgia burger of this thing, right? That's the kind of the point, is to get people's stories and then put it all together. And then eventually, maybe someday we'll have the whole story.
That's great, man. I'm getting goosebumps.
Mission accomplished, I guess.
How'd you get the 3-letter one? Was it already available, or did they like remove someone for you to get it, or how'd that work?
I don't know. I didn't have any tricks up my sleeve. I didn't remember. I remember a guy saying, some guy on the phone call saying, hey, use this code, use it in the next 3 minutes, go, 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 go. And I was like, some of these guys I'm talking to already have like 3-letter accounts, 4-letter accounts, whatever it was, wherever the heck he pulled this from or generated it from or stole it from, the code worked for me to make OaK, and I was OaK for a year. That one I never touched. I never entered a chat room with that other than the MTV stuff. I never did any Warez stuff. I never did any mass mails. Like, that was my baby. I knew I needed to cultivate that because I could be OaK at AOL.com, and I was for about a year. It was pretty fun.
So is there anything else you want to talk about related to AOL?
Nothing really. I never really got in trouble on AOL, like some of the guys you've talked to. And it really, I mean, it was kind of, I guess some people did get officially busted, but, you know, I felt like at the time, the most trouble you could really get into is get an account nuked. You know, I got a couple angry IMs from Toss Advisor and a couple guides in my day, but, you know, nothing major as far as getting in trouble. You know, I always avoided carding and credit card phishing completely. That scene was never cool or really acceptable to me. I had to draw the line somewhere. I'm glad I avoided that, you know, listening to some of your guests who really did into some real trouble with that stuff. Well, here's a good story, which kind of is a good segue between AOL and the internet is the closest I probably got to getting in trouble was
Hack the planet. Hack the planet.
Check your feeds for the next part of this 3-part series.
Welcome to cyberspace.